Okay, in today's video, we're going to talk only about India's position now in this growing, very worrying war between Iran, the US, and Israel, because now it's a lot closer to us than it was 24 hours ago. The question we're asking is this: when the war reaches your backyard, does your silence now still remain diplomatic? And at what point does it start to seem like weakness? Because India is in a very sticky diplomatic position at this point. We're going to examine that because it's day 6 of the war, and like we know, a US submarine has torpedoed and sunk an Iranian ship in the Indian Ocean, not our territorial waters, but waters that we consider diplomatically, strategic and diplomatically important for India. So at what point, will that silence create a very dangerous vacuum? So I'm going to put all of the various arguments on the table before you. Like we do always, we look at both the left side and the right side of every argument, and I'll leave it up to you to finally decide. So let me first tell you what happened. The Iranian warship that sunk was called IRIS Dena. It was one of the newest frigates of the Iranian Navy. According to the Pentagon, the US submarine fired a Mark 48 heavyweight torpedo at the ship late Tuesday night. It sunk the vessel, snapping it and sending it to the bottom of the Indian Ocean. The US Defense Secretary, the world is still calling him a defense secretary, although he's calling himself the Secretary of War. Pete Hegseth confirmed the attack and called it the first sinking of an enemy warship with a torpedo since World War II. Weirdly, like it was something to be proud of. Sri Lankan authorities say the vessel sank 44 nautical miles off the southern coast of Sri Lanka. 180 people were on board. The Iranian foreign minister has confirmed that 87 Iranian sailors are feared to have been killed, and they're calling this an atrocity at sea. Iran has condemned this strike, and they have also said, and I'm quoting here, "Mark my words," said Iran's foreign minister, "the US will come to bitterly regret this precedent it has set." Now, that's another thing we're going to examine in this video, so pay close attention to that. Now, why is this incident so sensitive to India? Because just days before that ship was hit, it was participating in the International Fleet Review and the Milan naval exercises hosted by the Indian Navy in Visakhapatnam. These exercises are part of India's effort to sort of build military partnerships across the Indian Ocean that we take, like I said, very seriously. So ships from dozens of countries attend. Iran was one of those countries that came in as an invited guest of the Indian Navy. After the entire event was over, they sailed back home and it was destroyed by that US submarine outside of Sri Lanka. So the question that comes here is, does the host country have any responsibility towards the ships once they leave? India has not addressed that question formally so far. The Indian government has not issued any statement about the sinking of that ship. What are experts saying about the legality of America's strike? Wes Bryant, who is an American, the former US Air Force Special Operations targeting expert, and the former chief of civilian harm assessments at the Pentagon, has said the attack on IRIS Dena was illegal. He said the ship was transiting home after participating in training exercises hosted by the Indian Navy. And he basically said a warship that warship was not actively posing a threat. It was not participating in hostilities. So you cannot say that this warship was an imminent threat to anyone. If so, it is an incredibly dangerous example of military overreach. So there are experts from America who are confirming that this attack on that Iranian ship was illegal and doesn't, because it was not participating in hostilities, it was not a threat to anyone. And so that is not okay. This is illegal. So bring us back to India at this point. Does India have a responsibility to come out and say something? There are two sides of the argument here as well as far as India's role is concerned. Let me give you both sides of the argument. Argument number one, there says that the host country does have a responsibility towards your guests. So it says that, we could argue that India cannot detach itself from what happened. And this is, if you go through what the experts are saying, this is one argument, that the ship had participated in an event hosted by India, and when countries invite foreign warships for these exercises, the vessels are considered diplomatic guests, and during such events, the ships typically operate under peacetime protocols, which means that they are carrying either limited live weapons or their weapon systems are inactive as part of the safety and confidence building measures. At the point of these exercises, the whole point is cooperation and signaling partnership, not combat readiness. So it could be argued that this ship was not ready for combat at all. And if that was the case here, then that raises a sensitive possibility that the Iranian ship may have been less prepared for combat while it was transiting home, because when it came to India, the country was not at war. Now, this is why some critics argue that India at least has a moral responsibility towards that ship, and India should, from that perspective, should have issued a diplomatic protest or expressed concern because the ship had recently been invited and had been moving because it was our guest. That is argument number one. Let me give you argument number two, that once the ship leaves Indian waters, the responsibility ends there. That's the second argument, that naval exercises operate under clear rules. So the visiting warship leaves the host territorial waters, it returns under operational status under its own command. At that point, the ship is no longer part of the diplomatic umbrella of the host country, in this case India, and it becomes the responsibility of its own navy and its own government to ensure its safety, especially if it at this point is from a country that is at active war. Now, in this case, Iran and the United States had already engaged in hostilities before they had left from India. So the argument here is that it was Iran's responsibility. They could have requested a naval escort from India for this ship. They could have even temporarily remained in Indian waters in order to give themselves some protection. And so that is the second argument, that it is not India's responsibility to have protected that ship. But the criticism that India is facing right now is perhaps not, did you or did you not protect a ship, because you technically cannot protect a ship in open waters, is why have you not said anything? So let me give you some of those examples. The silence is triggering a lot of political criticism. Opposition leaders obviously say that the government has not responded to something that has happened so close in Indian waters. Some have asked whether India's influence on the Indian Ocean region is being challenged. So Congress President Mallikarjun Kharge has basically said that this is reckless abdication of India's strategic and national interests. He's basically saying that India has always been, a net security provider, but we are not reacting to something that has happened in our own backyard. Rahul Gandhi has basically said India's oil supplies are under threat. More than 40% of our imports are transiting through the Strait of Hormuz. Given all of this, we have effectively compromised our strategic autonomy, or he says the Prime Minister has compromised our strategic autonomy. We also have Jairam Ramesh, who has basically said should not be surprising that the Modi government has not broken its silence over the targeted assassinations in Iran, because he also says never before has the government looked so timid and so fearful. Now, this is the criticism that is coming from the opposition and some parts of civil society, that India has not said anything, because various naval experts have also said that once the ship crosses into international waters, it cannot be India's responsibility to keep that ship safe. But there are a couple of things here, which means that the US spy submarine was lurking in the Indian Ocean here, waiting. Could have been for days. This is something one would expect Indian intelligence needed to have already known. Second, was there a conversation between the US and India that such a thing was going to happen? Again, we don't know, because we don't have a statement. And finally, the fact that India has not diplomatically or otherwise released a statement about this attack on our guests is the third thing that has come under criticism. But let's actually zoom out of this one event and look at the entire geography of what has happened, or the timeline of the events of what has happened. It's really awkward timing as well, because the Iranian warship was in Visakhapatnam from mid-February onward for this exercise. It was around the same time that the Indian Prime Minister was on a high-profile visit to Israel. And at that point, I mean, we have a separate video about this, about the fact that the two leaders were hugging each other, that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu praised, our Prime Minister and said the Modi hug is now world famous. And during his visit, the Prime Minister received an award from Israel. He addressed their parliament. But most importantly, he reaffirmed that India stands firmly and clearly with Israel. a clear stand that we have not taken up till now. There was no criticism of what has happened in Gaza. There was no criticism of the human rights violations. There was no criticism of the fact that humanitarian aid is still being stopped to the people of Gaza. And, just the scale of human suffering at the hands of Israel was not mentioned at all. In fact, the Prime Minister offered condolence and support to the people of Israel for the deaths of October 7, 2023. So, all of this was happening obviously when Israel was ready, along with the United States, to attack Iran, because the Prime Minister's state visit was February 25-26. February 28, US and Israel attacked Iran, and those strikes included the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And I want to make it very clear here that India has had a relationship with Iran that dates back to 1950. So when the leader of another country is assassinated, there is a statement that is expected. That statement has come. It's not an official statement, but the Indian diplomat, our Indian diplomat, has visited visited his counterpart in New Delhi and offered condolences on behalf of India 7 days later. So there's obviously, the tightrope walk is also causing a lot of delays, and there's a lot of strategic sort of weighing in that is happening here. And that's because of the relationships that are in place. There are three entities effectively in this war, which is Iran, Israel, and the US, and we have relationships with all three. Now, let me tell you, India's relationship with Iran, like I said, goes back to 1950. And a lot of people in our country are forgetting that, because it would be completely wrong and foolhardy, and obviously we're not comparing to the people on Twitter, but to assume that India decides its diplomatic, stances based on the religion of the country. That is not true. India has great relationships with many, many Arab states. India has had a great relationship with Iran since the 1950s. So let me jog your memory. Iran has strategically been important to India because of the oil, but also because it provides us access to Afghanistan and Central Asia without having to go through Pakistan, just simply on the map. And that happens through the Chabahar port. Now, the Chabahar port is really important to us because we have invested 500 million. Delhi has committed close to 500 million to those port operations, because we are building road connectivity from Chabahar into Afghanistan, so we can get access to Central Asia and we can enter Afghanistan and Central Asia and other European countries without having to go through Pakistani territory at all. So which is why the port city of Chabahar is really important to us in Iran, and it's important for India to gain access to that port. Besides which, bilateral trade in India is really important. In 2022-23, we had $2.3 billion worth of trade, of which India's export was 1.66 billion and our import was about 600 million. So it is an important trade partner, but it's also geographically important to us. And we've had, like I said, a good relationship with Iran since 1950. At the same time, India has obviously built a relationship, a more recent relationship with Israel. We are one of Israel's most important defense buyers. India buys Israeli drones, missiles, radar systems, and surveillance technology. There's a separate video on that. And then, of course, there is the United States. Let's not forget defense intelligence, the fact that we have a strategy aimed at balancing China in our neighbourhood, military exercises that we do with the US. And, of course, remember, the United States is an important trade partner. We've just finished negotiating a trade deal with Donald Trump, which was difficult enough, and he is, by any yardstick, a mercurial, Machiavellian leader in that country right now. Please feel free to argue with me in the comment section. So we've got Iran, which is a regional partner, Israel, which is a defense partner, and the United States, which is, it is what it is. So we've got all of these various things that India is trying to balance, and maybe the silence is coming from that, where you don't want to, display any of your cards, and you want to keep your cards close to your chest. You don't really know which side you are on. Remember, India did this with Russia as well. And because of this complicated web of relationships, we've chosen not to respond, or to respond very quietly. New Delhi has said that we want dialogue, we want de-escalation. We've only now offered condolences on the death of the supreme leader of Iran when our foreign secretary Vikram Misri conveyed our condolences to the Iranian ambassador in New Delhi. India has called for a resolution, but we have not condemned anybody's action so far. The Prime Minister had said India stands for peace and stability, but we haven't said anything else. And that is where the entire question is. So I'm going to take a sidestep here and explain to you the difference, right? So there are two types of statements that can be put out by a country. One is the moral stance, and the other one is strategic diplomacy. So what India is doing right now is strategic diplomacy, and I'll explain. So a moral stance is when a country publicly declares that it believes something is right or wrong, even at the risk of upsetting some powerful partners. And it's usually framed on the principles of sovereignty, international law, human rights, opposition to war. And the purpose of making these statements is to signal your values to the world and also to your domestic, audiences. And the moral statements, though they can come with some costs and they can damage alliances, they are seen as something really important because they are about integrity. Strategic diplomacy is very different from that. Strategic diplomacy is when a government prioritizes alliances, geopolitical goals, and it avoids making strong public statements. Instead of giving anything outright, they'll call for dialogue, they'll urge some restraint, they'll avoid sort of assigning any blame to anyone, which is precisely what India is doing in this particular case. The goal is to be flexible and to sort of maintain all the windows open so you can choose a side when it suits you. I want to give you some examples of when India has taken strong moral stances in the past, because we do this. We have done this historically. So I'm taking you back to 2003. The United States had invaded Iraq under George W. Bush, claiming that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction. Washington asked several partners, including India, to contribute troops to stabilize Iraq. Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee refused. Not only did he refuse, Indian Parliament passed a resolution stating that that invasion was it lacked UN authorization and it violated international norms, and India declined to send troops despite pressure from Washington, and that decision reflected a moral position. I want to give you another example. During the Vietnam War, the United States had conducted a massive military operation in northern Vietnam. The Indian Prime Minister at that time, Indira Gandhi, criticized America openly for those campaigns, and basically repeatedly, said that this sort of intervention is illegal, and it supported the Vietnamese demand for self-determination. This was obviously a risky move at that time because Washington was a major global power in that Cold War, and despite that, India chose to have a moral argument. So we've done this in the past. And I'm giving you examples across the aisle, right? BJP and Congress, we've done this in the past. So the two sides of that argument, and I want to quote here Nirupama Rao. She's a very senior former diplomat, and she's put out a statement saying, a country that once championed international law and restraint should not appear tongue-tied when the conflict threatens the entire region. Strategic partnership should not come at a cost of the moral voice. If India aspires to be a major power, a civilizational voice, it cannot speak loudly about sovereignty in times of crisis and fall silent in other times. Strategic partnerships are important, but strategic autonomy also means retaining the courage to speak when war threatens to consume the entire region, end quote. Of course, the other argument and the flip side argument, which is also being put out by various experts, is that India chose to stay silent when Russia invaded Ukraine as well. We played both sides. We literally hugged both sides, and our interests are best served by avoiding being drawn into the conflict and by keeping all windows open. So there are two very clear points of view. There's a moral point of view and a strategic point of view. India at this point appears to be choosing the strategic point of view, but it's up to you really as citizens of the country to decide where you believe India should stand. Because this war is not just diplomatic. India's crude oil is in question right now, although the government has assured us that we have enough stocks of crude. Depends on how long that Strait of Hormuz is actually choked. Millions of Indian workers are working in the Gulf. I mean, just the idea of having to evacuate the Gulf is just, is Think about it. India depends on trade routes across the Indian Ocean for its energy and its security. And now the sinking of this warship means that it's expanding beyond the Middle East, it's coming into our neighborhood, and also it appears that America is interpreting this as anywhere we see an Iranian asset, we will feel free to bomb it at our will. So is this something we are okay with, especially when it happens in our neighborhood? Will war eventually force India to take a clearer position? I want you to tell me, do you believe, and there are two arguments I've placed before you. On one, do you believe that India has a responsibility to issue a statement about the warship that has gone down? Yes or no? Two, do you believe that between the two options that India has chosen, between strategic and moral, India appears to have been chosen a strategic route? Do you think that that is the right choice for our government to have taken? Leave me a comment in the comment section. I want to say when I wrap this up, I do realize that a lot of this information is really dense. And apart from the stuff that moves really quickly on YouTube and people are able to put out their videos much faster, my team and I have a small team, we spend a lot of time basically finding all of these routes. So we're putting a lot of effort into it. Let me know if it's too dense and we should simplify it in the interest of uploading faster and you sort of hitting the news when it happens. Or is this sort of density of information something you enjoy? Let me know.